One, Speak Easy podcast listeners, I don't know if you know this, but I like y'all a lot. And so I bring some awesome guests that can come and like break things down to the least common denominator. For all of you that had problems with division in school, I got your back. And this is one of those episodes where we're going to do some division, we're going to do some separation uh, when we have this discussion, and it's all about us telling our story. For many of you, you know some of the things that I've been through: homelessness, abuse, all of those things, and learning not to be someone who is trauma dumping, especially as a speaker and an author and an entrepreneur. I want to make sure that I am doing what's best for the listeners. So I'm excited about this particular conversation. So SD, introduce yourself to the studio audience.
Yes. Well, hello, everybody. My name is SD or Steven, and I am a Christian fiction author and editor, author, coach, doing all of the things, trying to adult and failing horribly at it on a daily basis. So, but you know what? I do the best that I can, and been through a lot of things, and it's been a tremendous amount of healing in the last, oh gosh, um 5-6 years or so, and just really honored to be able to have the opportunity to come on and share this with you guys.
And now the failing greatly is what got me. It's the failing greatly for me because I think that's all we can do sometimes. Is just go ahead and just gracefully fall. You ever have one of those moments where you know you're going to fall and you just got to do it gracefully? You can't. There's no other way. But I love that as a great starting point because listen, there have been things that have gone on in our lives that have tripped us up. It's made us stumble, it's made us fall. And what would you say is the first thing that you would tell somebody who's saying, "Oh, you know what, I'm ready to tell my story about this fall that I had or about being tripped." What would be the first thing that you would say to them as they are preparing to say, "I'm ready to tell the world"?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when it comes to traumatic events in our life, it has a very big impact in how we communicate, how we view the world. For the most part, unless you've gone through a period of healing or some counseling, or usually both, you're going to be re-experiencing a lot of those same feelings. And so, stuff that you've buried in the past suddenly comes boiling back up to the surface, and emotionally it can be very taxing. When I was writing my book, it's fiction, but I'm tackling the topics of sexual abuse from my own personal story through it. you know this is coming years after lots of intensive counseling and getting help, and it was still emotionally very triggering, and just emotionally heavy. So when you're getting up in front of people and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna lay it all out there, you have to understand you're taking a very vulnerable part of yourself that you may not have actually dealt with yet, and exposing it to everyone else, and you haven't given yourself the opportunity to actually heal before doing that. You're just like, oh, I just need to share it. That's a good thing, but you just have to be aware of what comes after that.
So wait, this I'm gonna tell you what imagery just came in my mind. Imagine when you are the child and we had a skinned knee and had the band-aid on it, and we're just like, I'm ready to have this band-aid off, and you just rip it and you end up ripping off the scab.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that hurts.
First of all, the pain from that was disrespectful. It was painful. But then on top of that, now there's another healing process that needs to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
And so,
Absolutely.
oh my goodness, I've definitely felt that pain, that sting. And um, man, I think it's an interesting, and I can't even say it's a balance, because you have the people that they just want to share, and they're not really healed, or they don't realize what's about to come their way. And then you have the other ones that are teetering with not telling their story because they're like, I don't want to hurt the people that are involved in the story. I don't want to, for the longest time, and I know something you guys, Speakeasy podcast listeners, you've heard us say before on the podcast is we grew up, depending on what era you were in, what generation you're in, you grew up with the whole idea of what goes on in this house stays in this house, which is very damaging.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say to that person that knows they have a story, um, and they're kind of feeling like they want to share, but they're saying, but it's supposed to be what goes on in this house stays in this house. So, how do I break free from that?
Yeah. That's a tough one because it varies so much from situation to situation. You know, when because my trauma memories were repressed, because from the time that I was 4 to the time that's as far back as I have remembered, to the time that I was 13, I was being sexually abused by my grandfather. We lived in the same house. No one else knew about it, but I shoved it so far down, I didn't remember a thing. That is until 2016 when it all kind of came back up to the surface. Now, that was difficult for my parents to hear, obviously. And if he hadn't already passed away, they would have made sure to assist him on the way out. And uh, the the difficult part came when I was letting them know, like, hey, I'm going to talk with other people about this because there's other people out there that are hurting like me. And they need to know that they're not alone. And my testimony is going to reach them in a different way than someone else is going to. And what was crazy was when I actually started sharing it, it was on a platform called Wattpad, which is a giant nerddom for authors, and fan fiction and other really strange things. But when I was sharing it, I actually had teenagers reaching out to me and asking me, like, I'm going through this right now. Like, what do I do? And being able to be open and be honest. And my parents, they were uncomfortable with it. No one wants to be like, yeah, my dad was the one who was abusing my child and I didn't know about it. Like, no parent wants that. And, a lot of those same concepts were in my story, my fictional story. And people who were family who didn't necessarily know about it found out in the author's note. So, surprise, surprise. But while it's uncomfortable, we have to gently do it. Doesn't need to be all at once, doesn't need to be on a marquee somewhere. But in those individual conversations, when someone's just like, yeah, I'm having a really tough time, I'm dealing with some things. Well, like, what things? Well, I had this come up. Wow, I did too. And in that moment, you're just speaking to them. You're not announcing it to the world. And in large part, that's how it starts. And sometimes it's just talking to a counselor first and having that be the person that you safely talk to. That's what I did. That's where it started, was talking to somebody who could help me work through the trauma. And then as I started healing and I could actually vocalize and actually like put a clearer picture together, it was still ugly, but at least it was honest and it was able to help people.
I love that. I know for me it was interesting because it was almost like you didn't see that, like you didn't pay attention to that. What was going on? And so for me, I'm a victor over molestation, and then my two girls are victors over molestation, and nobody knew about me being molested. Like I never said a word. My mother went to her grave never knowing. Nobody said anything, but it was a very hurtful thing to try to endure, helping my children heal from something that I had not even healed from.
Yeah.
So that was it was so like hard, and people didn't realize it because they didn't know that I had been molested. And so, for they're thinking, oh, you should be doing this and you should be this, and I'm like, No, y'all don't understand. There's a piece of the puzzle that you're missing, and once you get that piece, you're going to understand that it's a completely different picture. So I love that you said that, because I had to be comfortable in talking about it and healing from it. And then that in turn allowed them to start being comfortable. And the most interesting thing happened back when my oldest daughter was in middle school. And, she starts middle school, it's a brand new year, and somebody said something to her. And she was like, Mom, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Like, what do I? I said, well, they felt comfortable in telling you. I said, so as a woman of faith, and as a young woman of faith, you can pray,
Yep.
because sometimes they don't need a step by step graph of what to do next. Sometimes they just need to know somebody hears them.
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. One of the things that has touched me the most since my book has come out, and really the reason why I wrote it and why I chose to address sexual abuse within the fiction setting, is because it's not addressed. It's glorified, in many respects. And I'm like, there's nothing beautiful about sexual abuse at all. And one of my reviewers um, had shared a post not too long ago, and she was like, I had some stuff come back up, and it was before I read this, and then I read this, and she's like, and I felt like I could breathe again. Like, I felt seen. And I'm like, that right there, it was when we share our stories with other people, the people who you don't think would be able to relate to you. Suddenly you've given them an unspoken permission to be vulnerable, because you were brave and vulnerable first. And I've talked to people, and I've told them my entire story, and they're like, you're very open about this. And I was like, yeah, I am, because like, it seems like it's an easy thing, but it's a worked up to thing. It didn't start overnight. I still had to process through, the seething rage and anger that I had, work on forgiveness. And now I'm able to more freely talk about it, because it's not just my story. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other people's stories, but me being brave and courageous and actually stepping out and saying, this is what happened to me, allows other people to go, maybe I can do that too.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, that was everything. Like, we could shut down the podcast episode right now and all go, about our way, because again, there's somebody somewhere that will listen to that part and will start going to the counseling session. There's somebody somewhere that will hear that part and decide, okay, it's time for me to start journaling and kind of getting this out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I love that you did it in a different genre, because most people think if I'm telling my story in a book, it has to be a self help book, right? It has to be a journal. But the reality is that each person's individual journey is going to be different, and the people that you reach, you're going to reach them in a completely different way that's unique to your journey. So I love that you did that as well, because it sets you apart. And as a believer, that's what we are. We are set apart. So
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be that light that shines on us and puts us on Front Street. We can't hide.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I kept joking with people. They're like, well, why did you even choose Christian fantasy to write in? They're like, no one reads it, even Christians. I was like, I know, because 98% of the market for Christian fiction is Amish romance. I just found out about Amish romance, or yeah, yeah, it's like Amish romance in space. And I was just like, no, it was Amish vampires in space. And I'm like, see, like, they're out.
Wait.
This is like out for global domination now. And so, like, so I got to fight fire with fire. So we're going Christian fantasy, and we're tackling hard topics that no one else wants to talk about. I got stiff competition with Amish vampires. So
Right? Exactly. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is that really a thing? Oh
it is. I've seen the covers.
my. Oh my goodness, that is amazing. I love this episode. This has been so great, and I know that there again will be lives that are changed with this particular one. So I want you to let them know where they can find your books, where they can connect with you online, and that part. And then before we leave, I'm going to get you to say one more thing that I think is going to be really powerful before we leave too. So give them that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my debut novel is The City of Snow and Stars, and it's available in all formats right now. I actually, as this coming December, will have an illustrated edition, which I'm very, very excited about. So you guys can find it basically everywhere books are sold. I have my website, sdhowardauthor.com, and there's lots of information, character bios, maps, all sorts of fun things. And currently working on book 2, The City of Stone and Sorrow. So all of the angsty feels that began in book 1 will get ramped up and just annihilate everybody's emotional capacity in book 2. So very excited. I'm also on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So you can basically find me everywhere. You either look under the editing Bard or SD Howard author, and you are sure to find me.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? I know for me in this process, the scripture that I stood on was Psalms 34:4 in the message. God met me more than halfway. He freed me from my anxious fears. What was the scripture that you stood on as you went through this process?
I believe it is Joel 2:24, and he will restore to you the years that the locusts have taken. Because I had a lot of years taken from me, and God has been faithful to bring about. He is both restored and is restoring. He is both healed and is healing. It is a process until he takes me home. But there are, in many ways, it is a both and. But that scripture in particular, I kept pointing that out to God. Like when I would talk with him, I'm just like, you've made this promise to me, and I will hold tight to that.
Whew, I love that. Great way to end the episode. Speakeasy podcast listeners, this is all about you elevating in life and in business. So let me know how this episode resonated with you. Leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. And until next time, guys, I'm your host, Altvies. And don't forget to press it out. See ya.